The silent puzzle. 7 years ago, when love felt eternal and trust was the bedrock of every glance, every touch, I couldn't have foreseen the quiet betrayal weaving itself into my life. This story, however, isn't merely about heartbreak. It's about discovery, resilience, and the bittersweet liberation that followed. It began with something small, so small that most would dismiss it. A misplaced receipt tucked haphazardly into the pocket of her coat. It wasn't unusual for us to occasionally misplace things. Life was messy, after all. But this receipt told a story different from the life we shared. A dinner for two at a restaurant I'd never been to. On a night I distinctly remembered her saying she was working late. I hesitated to jump to conclusions. Love demands the benefit of the doubt, doesn't it? I gently tucked the receipt away, thinking little of it until the subtle signs began to reveal themselves like pieces of a scattered puzzle. Her phone, once casually left on counters and coffee tables, was now guarded like a treasure. Her laughter, once an open book, now seemed forced, chapters of our lives erased and rewritten. And then there were the late nights, the hastily explained absences, the growing gulf between us. I needed clarity, but I didn't want to become the villain in my own story, accusing without cause, prying without reason. So I waited, observing, hoping for a sign that my fears were unfounded, but instead, the evidence began to mount. One evening, as she slept beside me, her phone buzzed. A message preview flashed across the screen, a name I didn't recognize, a message that read simply, "Can't wait to see you again." My chest tightened. The world seemed to tilt, a cascade of questions flooding my mind. The next day, I sat alone in our home, staring at the phone in my hand. I'd always believed in honesty and transparency, but now those principles felt like a cruel irony. I opened her laptop, feeling the weight of every keystroke as I searched for something, anything, that would explain what was happening. And there it was, an email chain, hidden but not deleted, filled with words of affection, plans made in secret, a timeline that stretched back years, 7 years, 7 years of laughter and tears, of shared dreams and quiet nights under the stars, 7 years of building a life together, only to realize part of it was a facade. Confronting her was the hardest thing I'd ever done. When I laid out the evidence, her eyes filled with tears, not of denial but of guilt. She confessed, her voice trembling, and in that moment, the weight of her betrayal crashed down upon us both. But this story isn't about vengeance or despair. It's about rediscovery of myself, my strength, and my capacity to heal. The months that followed were grueling, filled with therapy, reflection, and rebuilding. Yet I emerged from that storm stronger, wiser, and more determined than ever to live a life rooted in truth. In the end, the silent puzzle of her infidelity was not the end of my story, but the beginning of a new chapter. A chapter where I learned the value of self-respect, the courage to walk away, and the importance of never losing sight of one's own worth. And so, the tale ends not with a broken heart, but with a heart that mended itself, piece by piece, ready to beat boldly once more. The road to redemption. In the weeks that followed, I stood at a crossroads. My mind oscillated between anger and sorrow, between longing for what was and acceptance of what would never be again. Friends and family offered support, though their voices sometimes felt like distant echoes against the cacophony of my own thoughts. There was no roadmap for this, no guidebook to navigate the ruins of trust and love. But amidst the chaos, I resolved not to let her betrayal define my story. If anything, it would serve as a catalyst, pushing me toward a future where authenticity reigned supreme. The first step was reclaiming my space. The home we had built together now felt like a mausoleum, haunted by the ghosts of our shared past. I packed her belongings meticulously, not out of spite, but because I needed the act to be intentional, symbolic. Each box I sealed was like closing a door on a memory. But as I sifted through the remnants of our life, I found a photograph, The two of us, smiling, carefree, standing on a beach at sunset. For a moment, my resolve faltered. The image was a relic of a time when everything seemed perfect, before the cracks began to show. I almost threw it away. But something stopped me. Instead, I placed it in a small wooden box, alongside other mementos of our life together. Not because I wanted to cling to the past, but because I wanted to remember the lesson it had taught me. Even the brightest moments can cast shadows. Rebuilding life after betrayal is a series of small victories. I started focusing on the things I had neglected during our marriage. Hobbies that had been pushed aside, friendships that had been unintentionally ignored, dreams I had shelved in the name of compromise. I took up painting, a skill I'd always admired but never attempted. The blank canvas became my sanctuary, a place where I could pour out emotions too complex for words. My first attempts were clumsy, but with each stroke I found clarity. By the time I completed my first painting, a turbulent sea under a stormy sky, I felt a sense of catharsis. I also rediscovered the joy of solitude. Walks through the park became meditative rituals. I found myself lingering in bookstores, picking up novels I'd never considered before. I began journaling, filling page after page with reflections, frustrations, and hopes for the future. One evening, while writing, I penned a phrase that would stay with me. Betrayal may break you, but healing rebuilds you stronger. An unexpected connection. Months turned into a year, and life slowly began to feel less heavy. It was during this time that I met someone new, unexpectedly, and without searching. Her name was Elena, and she radiated a warmth that was both comforting and disarming. We met at an art class. She was sketching, and I was adding finishing touches to a painting. She commented on the vivid colors I used, and we struck up a conversation. It wasn't love at first sight. It was something gentler, more patient. Our connection grew organically, built on honesty and shared interests. I told her about my past, and she listened without judgment, her empathy shining through. She shared her own stories, her own scars, and in doing so, we found a mutual understanding. Forgiveness and freedom. With Elena's encouragement, I did something I never thought I could. I forgave my ex-wife. Not for her sake, but for mine. I realized that holding on to anger was like clutching a shard of glass. It only hurt me. Forgiveness wasn't about forgetting or excusing her actions. It was about releasing the pain she had caused. I wrote her a letter, not one to send, but one to cleanse my soul. In it, I thanked her for the good times we shared and acknowledged the pain she caused. I let her go, once and for all. The new chapter, today my life feels richer, more vibrant. The betrayal that once felt like an end has become a beginning. My art has flourished, with my paintings finding their way into local galleries. Elena and I continue to grow together, our bond rooted in mutual respect and trust. And as I stand in my studio, surrounded by canvases filled with storms and sunsets, I realize that my story isn't about being broken. It's about becoming whole again. Because in the end, the greatest tales are those where the hero rises, not unscathed, but unyielding. Ripples of the past. Even as my relationship with Elena blossomed, the echoes of the past lingered. Healing, I had learned, isn't a straight path. Some days, I felt invincible, as though nothing could shake the new foundation I had built. Other days, a memory or a familiar song would resurface, pulling me back into the shadows of betrayal. Elena, perceptive as ever, never pressed me to move faster than I was ready. "It's okay to feel," she said one evening as we sat on her porch, a soft breeze carrying the scent of jasmine. "Pain has a way of teaching us what happiness truly means." Her words stuck with me. Pain wasn't my enemy. It was a part of my story, a chapter that couldn't be erased but could be reframed. One day, I stumbled upon an old journal from my married years. Flipping through its pages, I was struck by how much I had given of myself back then, how often I had put her needs before my own. It wasn't regret that filled me, but a quiet resolve. I would never lose myself again. The confrontation, it was nearly 2 years after the discovery of her infidelity that I saw her again. Not by design, but by chance. I was at a local cafe, sketching ideas for a new painting, when I noticed her entering. She looked almost the same, yet somehow different. Older, maybe, or simply carrying the weight of her own choices. Our eyes met, and for a moment neither of us moved. Then, with a hesitant smile, she approached my table. "Hi," she said softly. "Hi." We exchanged pleasantries, awkward and stilted, before she finally said what I sensed she had wanted to say all along. "I'm sorry. For everything." Her words hung in the air, fragile and sincere. I nodded, acknowledging her apology without anger or resentment. "I forgave you a long time ago," I said, surprising even myself with the truth of it. Her shoulders sagged, as if a weight had been lifted. "You seem happy," she said. "I am," I replied, and I realized I meant it. We parted ways after that, the conversation brief but meaningful. It was closure, not the dramatic kind found in movies, but the quiet, understated kind that comes with time and understanding, new horizons. With that chapter truly closed, my life felt freer. Elena and I began talking about the future, not in the abstract, but in tangible terms. We discussed trips we wanted to take, a home we might one day share, even dreams of starting a family. But the most significant moment came one evening as we walked along the beach, the same place where that old photograph had been taken. The sun dipped low on the horizon, casting a golden glow over the waves. "Elena," I said, stopping to face her. My heart raced, not with fear, but with certainty. "You've shown me what love should be, what it can be. I don't want to take another step without you by my side." I reached into my pocket and pulled out a small box, revealing a ring I had designed myself, inspired by the colors of the sea. Her eyes filled with tears, and she nodded before I could even ask the question. "Yes," she whispered, her voice breaking with emotion. 1,000 times yes. The rest is still unwritten. As we plan our life together, I find myself reflecting often on the journey that brought me here. Betrayal once seemed like the end of everything, but it was merely a detour, leading me to a path of growth, self-discovery, and ultimately, a love that feels unshakable. I don't paint storms as often anymore. My latest works are filled with light, sunrises, vibrant gardens, and serene landscapes. They're not just art, they're a reflection of my soul, of the peace I've found, because life, I've learned, isn't about avoiding pain. It's about finding beauty in its aftermath, about embracing the scars as part of the masterpiece. And in this new chapter, I've discovered that happiness isn't just possible. It's boundless. Whispers of suspicion. It started innocently, as most betrayals do. There were subtle changes in her behavior. Nothing dramatic, but enough to plant the seed of doubt. She began spending more time on her phone, often turning away when I entered the room. Her once warm demeanor grew distant, her laughter less frequent. Then came the nights she worked late, the weekends she claimed she needed time to herself. At first, I dismissed my suspicions. 7 years of marriage had built a foundation of trust, and I didn't want to believe there could be cracks beneath the surface. But the signs persisted. One evening, I noticed her phone buzzing repeatedly while she was in the shower. Curiosity got the better of me. I glanced at the screen. The messages were from someone named Alex, a name I didn't recognize. "Miss you. When can we meet?" My stomach churned. I set the phone down quickly, guilt washing over me for even looking. But the seed of doubt had sprouted. The turning point. I couldn't ignore the signs anymore. Over the next few weeks, I became hyper-aware of her actions. I noticed how she'd smile at her phone, how she seemed more distracted, more distant. One Saturday afternoon, while she was out running errands, I decided to search for answers. I started with her laptop, which she rarely used but often left open on the kitchen table. It didn't take long to find what I was looking for. Her email inbox contained a hidden folder, innocuously labeled Work Notes. Inside were dozens of messages between her and Alex. The exchanges were intimate, filled with inside jokes, shared memories, and plans for secret meetings. The dates stretched back over a year. My heart raced as I read through them, each message feeling like a dagger. There were mentions of hotels, late-night rendezvous, even gifts exchanged. My world, once so stable, now felt like it was collapsing. Confrontation. That evening, I waited for her to come home. My mind was a whirlwind of emotions: anger, betrayal, sadness, and confusion. When she walked through the door, smiling as if nothing had happened, I felt a mix of rage and heartbreak. "We need to talk," I said, my voice trembling. She looked at me, sensing the gravity in my tone. "What's wrong?" I placed the printed emails on the table, watching as her face went pale. For a moment, neither of us spoke. Then she began to cry. "I'm so sorry," she whispered, her voice barely audible. "I never meant for this to happen." Her words felt hollow, like echoes in a cavern. "Why?" I asked, my voice cracking. "Why would you do this?" She stumbled through her explanation. Loneliness, dissatisfaction, a connection with someone who made her feel alive. None of it made sense to me. We had built a life together, shared dreams and struggles. How could she throw it all away? "I didn't want to hurt you," she said, tears streaming down her face. "But you did," I replied, the weight of her betrayal sinking in. "For over a year you lied to me. Do you even know what you've done?" The aftermath: that night I slept in the guest room, though slept might be too generous a word. My mind replayed our conversation over and over, dissecting every word, every emotion. The next morning, she packed a bag and left to stay with a friend. We both needed space to process what had happened. In the weeks that followed, I found myself navigating uncharted territory. Friends and family offered support, but the decision of what to do next was mine alone. Forgiveness felt impossible, but so did the thought of ending a 7-year marriage. We tried counseling, though the sessions were strained. She expressed regret and a desire to rebuild our relationship, but I couldn't shake the images of her betrayal. Trust, once shattered, isn't easily restored. Ultimately, I realized that staying together would only prolong the pain. We decided to separate, and a few months later, we filed for divorce. Finding myself again. The months after our separation were some of the hardest of my life. I questioned everything: my judgment, my worth, even my ability to trust again. But slowly, I began to rebuild. I threw myself into work and hobbies, rediscovering passions I had neglected. I leaned on friends, confiding in them more deeply than I ever had before, and I sought therapy, which helped me process the betrayal and learn how to heal. Looking forward today, I carry the scars of that experience, but they no longer define me. I've learned that betrayal doesn't have to break you. It can be the catalyst for growth and self-discovery. While I may never fully understand why she made the choices she did, I've found peace in knowing that I did everything I could. And now, as I stand on the other side of that dark chapter, I look forward to a future filled with honesty, love, and resilience. Echoes in the empty house. After she left, the silence in our home became deafening. The spaces that once felt warm and alive now seemed hollow, filled only with the weight of memories. I found myself wandering from room to room, questioning every moment we'd shared. Had there been signs I missed? Times when her laughter had been forced, her affection a mask. Her side of the closet was empty now, a gaping void that mirrored the one in my heart. I thought I'd find solace in her absence, but instead it brought clarity. I had spent years building a life around someone who had been drifting away long before I realized it. Discovering more one day, while organizing papers for the divorce proceedings, I stumbled upon her old journal. I hesitated, debating whether it was right to read it. But curiosity, and perhaps a need for answers, overcame me. The entries painted a picture of a woman torn between guilt and desire. She wrote about feeling unfulfilled, about craving something more. She detailed her meetings with Alex, the thrill of their stolen moments, and the burden of keeping it all hidden. One passage stood out. I love him, but I'm not sure I'm in love with him anymore. Alex makes me feel alive in a way I haven't felt in years. It was a dagger to the heart, but also a strange kind of closure. Her betrayal wasn't about me being insufficient. It was about her own unresolved struggles. The unexpected. Phone call weeks later, my phone buzzed late at night. To my surprise, it was Alex. At first, I considered ignoring it, but something compelled me to answer. "I'm sorry to call you," he said, his voice hesitant. "I didn't know she was married when we met. She told me the truth later, but by then He trailed off. His words were a mixture of apology and justification, a tangled web of regret. He confessed that their affair had ended shortly after our confrontation. "She said she needed to fix things with you," he admitted. I didn't know whether to feel vindicated or enraged. In the end, I simply said, "What's done is done. We all have to live with our choices." The call left me with a strange sense of finality. It wasn't closure in the traditional sense, but it was a reminder that this chapter was truly over. Rebuilding trust in myself. The hardest part of healing wasn't forgiving her, it was forgiving myself. I replayed our years together, questioning every decision, every compromise I'd made. Had I given too much of myself? Ignored too many red flags? Therapy became my lifeline. My therapist helped me understand that trust, once broken, doesn't just affect your view of others, it can shatter your confidence in your own judgment. Rebuilding that trust in myself was a slow, deliberate process. I started setting boundaries not just with others, but with myself. I learned to prioritize my own needs and listen to my intuition. Slowly, the pieces of my self-worth began to come back together. A letter. Never sent. One day. As part of my healing process, my therapist suggested I write her a letter. Not to send, but to express everything I had left unsaid. The words poured out of me. Anger, sadness, disappointment, and a surprising amount of gratitude. Gratitude for the good times we had shared, for the lessons her betrayal had taught me, and for the strength I discovered within myself. When I finished, I folded the letter and placed it in a box with other mementos of our time together. It wasn't about forgetting. It was about letting go. The road ahead months turned into years, and life began to take on a new rhythm. I moved to a new apartment, one that felt like a fresh start. I reconnected with old friends, traveled to places I'd always dreamed of visiting, and even started dating again. Every step forward felt like reclaiming a piece of myself. I wasn't the same person I had been before the betrayal, but I was stronger, more self-aware, and more determined to live authentically. One evening, as I sat on my balcony watching the sunset, I realized something profound. The pain of her betrayal had transformed me. It had broken me open, but in doing so, it had made space for something new, something better. The first cracks began subtly, as these things often do. Our marriage, once vibrant and full of connection, had become routine. The conversations that once lasted late into the night had turned into perfunctory exchanges about bills and schedules. The laughter we used to share now felt like a distant memory. And then, there was her. Someone new, unexpected. Her name was Emily, a colleague I'd worked with for years but had only recently gotten to know. It started innocently. Coffee breaks at work, casual chats about shared interests. But somewhere along the line, the conversations grew deeper, the smiles lingered longer, and the air between us became charged with an unspoken tension. I told myself it was harmless. After all, everyone enjoys a little attention, a little validation, but deep down, I knew I was treading dangerous waters. The slippery slope. The turning point came at an office party. Emily and I found ourselves alone on the balcony, the hum of conversation and laughter fading into the background. We talked about everything: dreams, fears, regrets. She made me feel seen in a way I hadn't felt in years. When she touched my arm lightly, I didn't pull away, and when our eyes met, there was no mistaking what was about to happen. "I can't," I whispered, more to myself than to her. But then, I kissed her. The double life. What followed was a whirlwind of emotions: guilt, exhilaration, fear, and desire. Emily and I began seeing each other in secret, meeting at out-of-the-way cafes and rented hotel rooms. Every moment with her felt electric, like I was living in a different world. At home, I became more distant. I avoided my wife's gaze, feeling the weight of my betrayal every time she smiled at me. She noticed the change, of course. "Is everything okay?" she asked one evening, her eyes filled with concern. "Just stressed with work," I lied, hating myself for the ease with which the words came. But the truth was, I felt trapped between two lives, one built on years of shared history and another fueled by passion and novelty. The guilt and the justification, I began justifying my actions to myself. Hadn't my wife grown distant first? Didn't I deserve to feel wanted? To feel alive? These rationalizations were a fragile shield against the guilt that gnawed at me. But guilt has a way of seeping through even the strongest defenses. I found myself waking in the middle of the night, staring at the ceiling, wondering how I had become this person. Emily, for her part, never pushed. "I know this can't last forever," she said once, her voice tinged with sadness. "But I can't help how I feel." Her words only deepened my conflict. I cared for her, but I also knew that what we were doing was unsustainable. The revelation, it all came crashing down one evening when my wife found a text on my phone. I had been careless, leaving it unlocked on the kitchen counter. "Who's Emily?" she asked, her voice trembling. My heart sank. There was no point in denying it. The evidence was there, plain as day. "She's someone I've been seeing," I admitted, my voice barely above a whisper, her face crumpled, a mixture of shock, pain, and anger. "How could you do this to me? To us?" There were no words that could undo the damage, no excuses that could make it right. The fallout. The days that followed were a blur of arguments, tears, and painful silences. My wife demanded to know everything: how long it had been going on, why I had done it, whether I had ever loved her. Answering her questions felt like reopening a wound with every word. She left to stay with her sister for a while, giving us both time to think. I used that time to reflect on what I truly wanted. The crossroads, in the end, I had to make a choice: fight for my marriage, or let it go. Both paths seemed fraught with pain and uncertainty. I began seeing a therapist, hoping to untangle the mess I had made of my life. Through those sessions, I realized that my infidelity was less about my wife and more about me. My insecurities, my fears of stagnation, my longing for something undefined. When my wife returned, we sat down to talk, not to argue, but to truly communicate for the first time in years. I confessed everything, not just about the affair, but about the feelings that had led me to it. She listened, though her expression remained unreadable. "I don't know if I can ever trust you again," she said finally. "I understand," I replied, "but I want to try, if you're willing." The long road. Ahead rebuilding. A marriage after infidelity is no small feat. It requires patience, honesty, and a willingness to face uncomfortable truths. Whether we made it or not, I couldn't say just yet. But one thing was certain. I had learned the hard way that betrayal doesn't just break trust, it breaks people. And while the pieces could be picked up, they would never fit together the same way again. The betrayal that cut deeper. Some betrayals strike not just at your heart, but at the very fabric of your trust in the world. This one was like that, a double-edged sword, wielded by not just my wife, but my best friend. I always thought of Jake as a brother. We grew up together, sharing secrets, adventures, and dreams. He was the best man at our wedding, his toast full of jokes about how lucky I was to have found someone like her. He was supposed to be family. That's what made the discovery all the more devastating. The clues I didn't want to see. Looking back, there were signs. The way Jake and my wife would sometimes share a laugh at a joke I hadn't caught. The way she seemed to light up when he walked into a room. I dismissed it all, thinking their easy camaraderie was just a reflection of how much he cared for us. Both of us. But then there were the excuses. My wife would cancel plans with me, saying she was meeting a friend or needed time to think. Jake, too, had started pulling away, skipping our usual hangouts and offering vague reasons when I asked. One evening, after a particularly strange exchange where Jake left my place abruptly after my wife arrived home, I felt a knot of unease forming in my gut. Still, I told myself I was imagining things. The uncovering. The truth came out in the cruelest way. I was at Jake's house one afternoon, having stopped by to drop off some tools he had lent me. He wasn't home, but the door was slightly ajar. I stepped inside, intending to leave the tools on the counter. That's when I saw it. A scarf. My wife's scarf, draped over the back of his couch. It felt like my mind split in two. On one side, logic tried to piece together an innocent explanation. On the other, my instincts screamed the truth I didn't want to believe. That night, I confronted her. "Why was your scarf at Jake's house?" I asked, trying to keep my voice steady. Her face froze, her eyes darting away. "I must have left it there when we all hung out last time," she said too quickly, too defensively. "We haven't been to Jake's together in months," I replied, my heart pounding. Her silence spoke louder than any words. The confession over the next hour, the truth unraveled in fits and starts. Yes, there had been something between them. Yes, it had been going on for months. She broke down as she spoke, tears streaming down her face, but her words only deepened the wound. "It wasn't supposed to happen," she said, her voice choked with emotion. "I didn't plan this, but I felt lost. And he was there. He understood me." Her words hit like blows. "Jake?" I spat his name like poison. "My best friend? How could you do this?" She had no answer, only apologies and explanations that felt hollow. Confronting Jake. The next day, I drove to Jake's house, fury coursing through my veins. He opened the door, looking startled to see me. "We need to talk," I said, my voice sharp. He didn't deny it. He didn't try to lie. Instead, he stood there, looking at the ground as I unleashed every ounce of anger and betrayal I felt. "I trusted you," I shouted, my voice breaking. "You were like a brother to me. How could you do this?" He finally looked up, guilt etched into his face. "I'm sorry," he said, his voice barely audible. "It just happened. I didn't mean to hurt you." His words were a pathetic echo of my wife's, offering no solace, no justification. The fallout in the days that followed, my world crumbled. My marriage was in ruins, and the bond I had shared with Jake was shattered beyond repair. I felt isolated, betrayed by the two people I had trusted most. I threw myself into work, trying to distract myself from the pain, but it lingered. A constant ache that refused to fade. Friends and family offered support, but their sympathy only underscored the depth of my loss. Choosing a path forward. Eventually, I realized I had to make a choice. Let this betrayal define me, or find a way to move on. I sought therapy, hoping to understand not just their actions, but my own feelings. I learned that betrayal says more about the betrayer than the betrayed, and that healing comes from within. Divorce became inevitable. My wife and I parted ways, the love we once shared irreparably tainted. As for Jake, I cut him out of my life entirely. Rebuilding time didn't erase the pain, but it did dull its edges. I moved to a new city, started fresh, and slowly began to trust again. The scars of their betrayal remain, but they are a reminder of the resilience I found in the aftermath. Now, when I think of them, it's with a mixture of sadness and acceptance. They took something from me, but they also taught me something invaluable, the importance of self-worth and the strength it takes to rebuild after devastation. A strange shift in dynamics. It began subtly, in ways I couldn't quite put my finger on at first. My father, always warm and affable, had started spending more time around my wife and me. He'd offer to help with repairs around the house, show up unannounced with gifts, and linger after family dinners longer than usual. At first, I thought nothing of it. After all, he was my father. I appreciated his involvement, thinking he was simply being the doting dad. My wife seemed equally appreciative, often commenting on how kind and supportive he was. But as time went on, I noticed small things, a shared look between them that lingered a beat too long, private conversations that stopped abruptly when I entered the room. I brushed off my unease, dismissing it as paranoia. The discovery. The truth began to unravel one night when I returned home earlier than expected from a business trip. I opened the door to find the house dark and quiet. But as I made my way to the bedroom, I heard muffled voices, familiar voices. My heart raced as I pushed open the door. There they were, my wife and my father, caught in a moment that shattered my reality. The room spun as a torrent of emotions crashed over me, rage, betrayal, disbelief. "What the hell is going on?" I demanded, my voice shaking. They scrambled to cover themselves, their faces pale with shock. My father was the first to speak, his voice trembling. "It's not what it looks like," he stammered. But the evidence was undeniable. My wife began to cry, reaching for me. "I'm so sorry," she sobbed. "I didn't mean for this to happen." The confession, in the hours that followed, the full extent of their betrayal came to light. It had started months earlier, she admitted, during a period when she claimed to feel neglected and lonely. My father, in his own words, had been there for her in ways I hadn't. "It wasn't planned," my wife insisted. "It just happened." My father, unable to meet my eyes, mumbled apologies that felt empty and hollow. He tried to explain himself, saying he'd been struggling with his own issues, but his words only deepened the wound. "You're my father," I spat, my voice thick with disgust. "How could you do this to me? To your own son?" He had no answer, only a look of shame that offered no comfort. The fallout. The days that followed were some of the darkest of my life. The betrayal felt all-encompassing, poisoning not just my marriage, but also the bond I had shared with my father. I couldn't look at either of them without feeling a surge of anger and heartbreak. I moved out of the house, unable to bear being in the space where their betrayal had taken place. My wife begged me to stay to try and work through it, but her pleas fell on deaf ears. As for my father, I cut off all contact. The man who had once been my role model was now a stranger, someone who had destroyed the foundation of trust and respect we had built over a lifetime. The ripple effects. The betrayal didn't just affect me, it rippled through my entire family. When the truth came out, my mother was devastated. She confronted my father, her fury and heartbreak palpable. "How could you do this to our son?" she demanded, her voice cracking. Their marriage didn't survive the fallout. My parents divorced within months. their once solid partnership reduced to ashes. Friends and extended family were equally shocked. The scandal became a painful topic of conversation, a wound that refused to heal. Rebuilding and reflection, it took years to process what had happened and begin to heal. Therapy became a crucial part of my journey, helping me navigate the complex emotions of anger, betrayal, and grief. Through therapy, I learned to separate their actions from my own sense of self-worth. Their betrayal said more about them than it did about me. It was a reflection of their flaws, not my failures. Over time, I rebuilt my life. I focused on my career, cultivated meaningful friendships, and eventually found love again. Trust was hard to come by, but I learned to open myself up piece by piece. The long shadow, the betrayal left a scar, one that would never fully fade. My relationship with my father remained strained, limited to superficial interactions at family gatherings. My ex-wife became a distant memory, someone I no longer thought of with anger, but with a sense of detachment. In the end, I found strength in the pain. It taught me resilience, self-reliance, and the importance of surrounding myself with people who truly valued and respected me. The betrayal in disguised trust is a fragile thing, often disguised as unshakable until the unthinkable happens. For years I had trusted my wife's best friend, Clara. Their bond seemed unbreakable, a sisterhood forged over years of shared laughter, secrets, and memories. I appreciated Clara's presence in my wife's life, thinking of her as a confidant who provided support and understanding when I couldn't. But that trust, too, was destined to shatter. The subtle signs. The signs were there, though I failed to see them for what they were. Clara had always been a regular fixture in our lives. Weekend brunches, shopping trips, and late-night wine-fueled conversations with my wife that often stretched into the early hours. At first, I thought nothing of it. Why would I? Clara was family in all but name. But over time, I began to notice changes in my wife. She seemed more distant, her laughter with me replaced by private giggles shared with Clara. There were whispered conversations that ended abruptly when I entered the room and text messages she quickly hid. Even then, I dismissed my unease, chalking it up to my own insecurities. After all, they were best friends. What could possibly be wrong with that? The moment of truth. The truth revealed itself one night when I came home earlier than expected. The house was quiet, but something felt off. My wife's laughter floated down the hallway, followed by Clara's. The sound of it, the intimacy in it, pricked at my nerves. I walked toward the living room, my steps slowing as I heard their voices, soft and low. And then I saw them, my wife and Clara, wrapped in each other's arms, their faces inches apart. My breath caught in my throat as I realized what was happening. They didn't notice me at first, too engrossed in the moment to sense my presence, but when I cleared my throat, their heads snapped around, their faces a mix of shock and guilt. "What the hell is going on here?" I demanded, my voice trembling with a mix of anger and disbelief. The confession. They scrambled to explain, their words tumbling over each other. My wife admitted that her feelings for Clara had changed over the past year, evolving from friendship into something deeper. "It wasn't planned," she said, her voice trembling. "I didn't mean for it to happen." Clara, too, apologized, though her words felt hollow. "I never wanted to hurt you," she said, avoiding my gaze. Their excuses felt like daggers, each one cutting deeper into my sense of trust and self-worth. The aftermath, the betrayal, felt different than I had imagined. It wasn't just about my wife cheating. It was about the layers of deception, the emotional intimacy she had shared with Clara that she had withheld from me. I moved out the next day, unable to stay in the house where their betrayal had unfolded. My wife begged me to stay, insisting that she was confused and needed time to figure out what she wanted. But I knew what I wanted. I wanted honesty, respect, and loyalty, things that had been stripped away by her actions. Clara's role in the fallout, Clara's betrayal felt just as personal. She had been a trusted part of our lives, someone I had welcomed into my home and treated as family. Her role in the affair left a sour taste that I couldn't shake. When I confronted her directly, she seemed genuinely remorseful. "I didn't mean for this to happen," she repeated, as if those words could undo the damage. But apologies weren't enough. The bond we had shared, platonic as it was, had been irreparably broken. Rebuilding and reflection. In the months that followed, I sought therapy to process the betrayal and begin healing. I learned to separate their actions from my own self-worth, recognizing that their choices were a reflection of their own issues, not my failures. Divorce became inevitable, and I moved on with my life, determined not to let their betrayal define me. Trust was harder to come by in future relationships, but I refused to let fear close me off to the possibility of love. The lessons learned. The experience taught me painful but valuable lessons about love, trust, and boundaries. It showed me the importance of self-respect and the strength it takes to walk away from toxic situations. Though the scars remain, they are a reminder of my resilience, a testament to the fact that even in the face of profound betrayal, it is possible to rebuild and find happiness again. The unraveling of a shared life. The weeks after discovering my wife's affair with Clara were a blur of anger, sadness, and endless questions. At night I lay awake, replaying every interaction between the two of them, wondering how I could have been so blind. The intimacy I thought they shared as best friends had been a mask for something much deeper. She claimed it wasn't just about passion, but about connection. "Clara understands me in a way I didn't realize I needed," she said one night, tears streaming down her face. Her words, though meant to explain, only deepened the wound. How could she find solace in someone else while leaving me to feel like a stranger in my own marriage? Confronting Clara, I decided I couldn't let Clara's role in this go unaddressed. I called her, insisting we meet face to face. When we sat down at a nearby coffee shop, the air between us was thick with tension. "I trusted you," I began, my voice trembling. "You were supposed to be her friend, our friend. How could you betray me like this?" Clara looked down, unable to meet my eyes. "I never meant to hurt you," she said softly. "It started as comfort, and then it became something I couldn't control." "Comfort?" I spat, incredulous. "You destroyed my marriage for comfort?" Her silence was answer enough. The family fallout. When the affair became public within our circle of family and friends, the reactions were swift and polarizing. My parents were furious, not just with my wife but also with Clara, who they had considered part of the extended family. My mother especially took it hard. "How could she do this to you? And with Clara, of all people," she said, her voice a mix of anger and sorrow. Friends, too, struggled to navigate the situation. Some distanced themselves entirely, unable to reconcile their loyalty to me with their history with Clara and my wife. Others rallied around me, offering support and encouragement to move forward, divorce and moving on. The divorce was messy. My wife insisted she wanted to remain amicable, but every conversation about dividing assets and custody of our shared life only deepened the bitterness. I tried to keep my emotions in check, focusing on practicalities, but it was impossible not to feel the sting of betrayal at every turn. I moved out of our house, leaving behind the memories and the ghosts of what we once had. Setting up a new home felt both freeing and devastating, a clean slate marred by the pain of what had been lost. Rebuilding myself therapy became my lifeline. I spent hours unpacking the layers of betrayal, examining not just their actions, but my own sense of worth. I realized that their affair wasn't a reflection of my shortcomings, but of their choices, choices that spoke more to their own struggles than to my value as a partner. I also began focusing on my own happiness. I took up hobbies I'd abandoned during the marriage, reconnected with old friends, and allowed myself to dream of a future untainted by betrayal. Closure with my wife and Clara months later, I met with my wife for what felt like the final chapter of our shared story. She apologized again, her voice heavy with regret. "I know I've hurt you more than I can ever make up for," she said. "I hope one day you can find it in your heart to forgive me." "I don't hate you," I replied, surprising even myself. "But I can't forget what you did. I hope you find whatever it is you're looking for." As for Clara, I chose not to seek further interaction. The pain of her betrayal was too great, and I knew that holding on to anger would only hinder my own healing. Finding strength in the aftermath, the scars of their betrayal remain, but they no longer define me. I've learned to trust again, though more cautiously, and to value myself in ways I never did before. Life after betrayal isn't easy, but it's possible to rebuild, to find love, happiness, and peace once more. And as for my wife and Clara, I've let go of the need for answers or apologies. Their choices are theirs to live with. My focus now is on my own path, one that is brighter and freer than I ever thought possible. The journey toward healing. The months following the divorce were a complicated mix of reflection, self-discovery, and slow healing. I spent a lot of time alone, but not in isolation. I learned the value of solitude, not as a punishment, but as an opportunity for introspection. It wasn't about erasing the past, but about accepting it, acknowledging the scars and moving forward. I dove into activities that gave me joy, things I'd neglected while wrapped up in a marriage that had been built on lies. I began to travel more, visiting places I'd always dreamed of seeing, but had put off. The freedom of being able to choose how I spent my days felt like a small form of redemption. Forgiving myself, a crucial part of the healing process was learning to forgive myself. For so long, I blamed myself for not seeing the signs, for trusting them both so completely. I questioned my worth, wondering what I had done wrong, what I had missed. But the truth slowly began to surface. I hadn't done anything wrong. I had loved, and I had trusted, and that was not a fault. Through therapy, I began to understand that forgiveness was as much about releasing my own anger and hurt as it was about letting go of the past. It wasn't about excusing what they did, but about freeing myself from the weight of resentment. The unexpected encounter, it was a year after the divorce when I met her, Mia. She was nothing like my ex-wife or Clara, and that was exactly what I needed. I wasn't looking for love, not at first. But Mia had a way of making me feel comfortable in my own skin again, of reminding me that there was more to life than betrayal. We met at a small bookstore, of all places. I was browsing the travel section, looking for inspiration for my next trip, when she struck up a conversation about a book on hiking in the Alps. It wasn't an earth-shattering moment, but it was one of those rare, serendipitous encounters that felt like the start of something new. We started talking about our travels, and before long we were sharing stories of life, of mistakes, of the things we'd learned along the way. There was no pressure, no expectations. Just two people connecting over shared experiences. Taking things. Slow Mia and I took things slow. I wasn't in any rush to jump back into a relationship, especially not one that was rooted in the kind of betrayal I had experienced. But over time, I realized that Mia made me feel seen in a way I hadn't felt in years. She never pushed me to talk about my past, but when I did, she listened with compassion and patience. And when I saw the way she cared for me, it wasn't out of pity or obligation. It was because she genuinely wanted to. I began to trust again, piece by piece. The walls I had built around my heart slowly crumbled, not because I had forgotten what had happened, but because I was no longer afraid of it. I had learned that love, when it's real, doesn't come with conditions or expectations. It comes with understanding, with space for both partners to grow. Closure and moving. On one day, months after reconnecting with Mia, I ran into my ex-wife at a mutual friend's gathering. Seeing her again, after all the pain, felt like a weight lifting off my chest. She looked the same, familiar but distant. We talked briefly. She apologized once again for everything that had happened, but I could see in her eyes that she had accepted the consequences of her actions. She had moved on in her own way, and so had I. "I hope you're happy," she said, her voice softer than I remembered. "I am," I replied, and for the first time I truly meant it. Building a new future with Mia, life felt different. It wasn't perfect, nothing ever is, but it was real. We shared our dreams, our goals, and our fears, and through that, we began to build something new. The lessons from my past weren't buried, but they had been integrated into the person I was becoming. Mia wasn't a replacement. She was a reminder that love could be different, that it could be kind, patient, and free from the shadows of betrayal. The path ahead years passed, and I no longer looked back with pain, but with a sense of gratitude for the journey. The betrayal I had experienced with my wife and Clara was no longer the defining moment of my life. Instead, it was part of the fabric of who I had become, someone stronger, wiser, and more capable of loving in a healthy, authentic way. And as for my ex-wife and Clara, I had long since let go of the bitterness that once consumed me. People make choices, and sometimes those choices hurt others in ways that can't be undone. But in the end, we all have to live with the consequences of those choices. For me, the consequences had led me here, to a place where healing was not just a possibility, but a reality. And I was finally ready to embrace the future with open arms. A new beginning. The months with Mia were nothing short of transformative. Every day spent with her felt like another layer of healing, another opportunity to rediscover myself outside the shadow of the past. She wasn't perfect, and neither was I, but together we created something grounded in trust and mutual respect. One evening, after we'd returned from a weekend getaway to the coast, Mia and I sat on the balcony, the sound of the waves crashing against the shore below us. She turned to me with a thoughtful look, a question lingering in her eyes. "You know, we've been together for a while now," she began, "and I can't help but wonder, have you really forgiven yourself for everything that happened before?" The question caught me off guard. I had never truly thought about it in such a direct way. Forgiveness, I had realized, had been a slow and ongoing process, not just toward my ex-wife or Clara, but toward myself. "I think I have," I said after a pause, the words feeling heavier than I expected. "Or at least I'm trying to. It's not about forgetting what happened, but about not letting it control me anymore. I'm learning to live with it, and in doing so, I'm learning to let go." Mia nodded, her smile warm. "That's a good way to put it, facing old ghosts." As the relationship with Mia deepened, the past never completely disappeared. Occasionally, I'd have moments where I'd find myself haunted by memories of my ex-wife and the betrayal I'd experienced. A part of me still wondered if I could have done something differently, if I could have prevented the affair, or whether there was something I could have said to make her understand the pain it caused. One particular evening, the unease crept up again. Mia noticed it before I said anything, and she placed her hand on mine. "It's okay," she said gently. "We all carry scars, but you don't have to carry them alone anymore." Her reassurance was exactly what I needed to hear. I realized in that moment that while my past had shaped me, it didn't have to define me. I could acknowledge it, yes, but I didn't need to live there. The next step. A year into our relationship, the question of the future began to loom over us. Mia was everything I'd ever wanted in a partner. Kind, thoughtful, and understanding. I had never thought I would be ready for another committed relationship after what I'd been through, but with her, everything felt different. I wanted to share my life with her. One night, as we lay in bed, I turned to her with a nervousness I hadn't felt in a long time. "Mia," I began, my voice quieter than usual. "I've been thinking about the future, and I want to know if you can see it with me. I want to build something lasting, something strong." Mia's eyes softened, and she smiled, her hand gently squeezing mine. "I've thought about it too," she said. "I think we're building it already, one step at a time. And I'm with you." I felt a wave of relief wash over me, a sense of certainty I hadn't had in years. With her, I wasn't just recovering from the past. I was creating a future I never thought I could have. A proposal. Several months later, during a quiet evening at our favorite park, I found myself standing before Mia, my heart racing with anticipation. The trees around us were dressed in golden hues from the setting sun, and the world felt still, like the calm before a significant moment. "Mia," I said, my voice catching slightly, "in the time we've been together, you've shown me what love can really be, and you've made me believe in it again. I don't want to waste another day without you by my side. Will you marry me?" Her eyes widened, and for a moment I feared I had said too much, but then her expression softened, and she took a deep breath before smiling brightly. "Yes," she whispered. "1,000 times. Yes." The journey ahead. Our engagement was followed by a whirlwind of wedding planning, but it was also marked by quiet moments, simple joys, and deeper conversations about what we wanted our life together to be. It wasn't about grandeur or perfection. It was about us, about creating a life that was true to who we were. In the process, I began to realize that my past, though painful, had led me to this place. It had taught me resilience, the importance of self-worth, and how to love again. And in the years that followed, Mia and I built a partnership based on mutual respect, honesty, and the knowledge that we were stronger together. The road to forgiveness, healing, and love had been long, but it had been worth it. The scars that remained were no longer sources of pain, but reminders of how far I'd come, of how much I had grown. Epilogue. On our wedding day, as we stood at the altar, surrounded by friends and family, I looked at Mia and knew that everything had changed. The past no longer defined me. The hurt was no longer in control. In this new chapter of life, I was ready to embrace the future, and it was bright, full of pause, life after marriage. The healing journey continues. The months that followed our wedding were filled with the kind of joy I hadn't known in years. Mia and I built a life together. Quiet mornings sipping coffee, spontaneous weekend trips, and late-night talks about dreams and fears. But even in this newfound happiness, we both knew that life had a way of throwing challenges our way. The scars from my past, though no longer raw, still had their moments of resurfacing. Mia and I were committed to facing these moments together. There were times when the weight of what had happened before lingered between us, subtle and unspoken, but we worked hard to ensure it never took root. We communicated openly about our fears, our insecurities, and about what it meant to truly trust again. The shadow of the past. One quiet afternoon, as we sat on the couch after a long week, I found myself lost in thought. The past, despite its many lessons, still had its way of creeping into my consciousness. A sudden memory of my ex-wife would flash into my mind, uninvited. I'd catch myself wondering what could have been if things had been different. It wasn't regret, but a lingering sense of what-ifs. Mia noticed the shift in my mood. She leaned over and placed her hand on mine. "You're quiet," she said, her voice soft. "What's on your mind?" I hesitated for a moment, unsure if I should voice my feelings. But I knew Mia was my partner. And with her, I didn't need to carry the weight alone. "I've been thinking about the past," I confessed. "About everything that happened with my ex, with Clara. There are days when it feels like the shadows of that time are still there, even though I've moved on." Mia squeezed my hand, her expression understanding. "It's okay to have those moments," she said. "The past will always be a part of you, but it doesn't have to control you. You don't need to erase it to move forward. Just don't let it take away from what we're building now." Her words were a balm to my soul. I nodded, grateful for her patience, and for the way she never tried to push me into forgetting the past, but instead encouraged me to integrate it into my life in a way that didn't define me. Building new memories. As the years passed, Mia and I continued to build a life that felt truly ours. We moved into a house we had always dreamed of, one filled with light, warmth, and room to grow. It wasn't just a house, it was a symbol of everything we had worked through and created together. We spent weekends gardening, cooking new recipes, and hosting friends for dinner. The house slowly began to reflect the life we were creating, a life that was rooted in love, trust, and shared dreams. One of the most profound things we built together was a family. Mia and I had always talked about children, but it was something we approached with care and excitement. We both understood that starting a family wasn't just about having kids. It was about creating a safe, loving environment for them to thrive. After much conversation and planning, we decided it was the right time. The arrival of our first child. When the day came, the hospital felt like a blur of excitement and nerves. I held Mia's hand through every contraction, whispering words of encouragement as she brought our child into the world. The moment our son was born, I knew my life had changed forever. Mia looked at me, tears in her eyes, as we both held our son for the first time. It wasn't just about becoming parents. It was about the promise we had made to each other to build something better, something lasting. As I looked at our newborn son, I realized that the past, with all its pain, had led me to this moment. Every heartbreak, every betrayal had brought me to Mia, and together we had created this new, beautiful life. Learning to be a family parenthood wasn't always easy. There were sleepless nights, moments of doubt, and challenges we hadn't anticipated. But through it all, Mia and I stood by each other, proving that we could handle whatever came our way. Our love for each other had been tested, but it had grown stronger, and now we were faced with the new challenge of nurturing and guiding our child through life's ups and downs. As our family grew, so did our bond. The joy of seeing our son take his first steps, say his first words, and laugh for the first time was a reminder of how far we had come, from the pain of betrayal to the warmth of unconditional love. A moment of reflection. On the night of our son's first birthday, Mia and I sat on the porch, watching the stars above. It had been a year of growth and change. The house was filled with laughter and love, and we had become a family in the truest sense. But as I sat there with Mia holding her hand, I couldn't help but think back on everything that had led me to this moment. "I never thought I'd be here," I said softly, my voice filled with gratitude. "I never thought I'd have this life." Mia turned to me, her smile soft and knowing. "You deserve it. We both do." I kissed her forehead, a quiet promise in my heart that I would never take this love, this family, for granted. We had worked hard to get here, to build something beautiful out of the ashes of the past. And as long as we had each other, I knew we could face whatever the future held. The future A's. The years went by. Life continued to evolve. Our son grew, and soon we were talking about the possibility of having another child. We learned new lessons about patience, resilience, and the power of love. Though the past had shaped us, it was no longer the center of our lives. The future was ours to create. Mia and I often looked back on how we had met, on the journey we had taken to get to this point. From the pain of betrayal to the joy of building a family, we had learned that love, in its purest form, was about forgiveness, growth, and the willingness to take chances. And as we looked to the horizon, we knew that the greatest adventure of all was still ahead of us. The dance of parenthood and love. The years with Mia and our growing family were full of unexpected twists and turns. Parenthood had changed us in ways we hadn't anticipated. It had brought us closer, deepening the bond between us, but it also tested us in ways that we couldn't have foreseen. The challenges of balancing work, raising children, and nurturing our relationship brought new insights into the dynamics of love and partnership. In the early days, when our son was still a toddler, Mia and I found ourselves exhausted, our relationship taking a back seat to the constant demands of parenthood. The sleepless nights, the endless feedings, the baby-proofing of the house. It felt as though we were drowning in responsibilities. But even in those moments of fatigue, we always found small ways to reconnect. A quiet kiss before bed, a hand held during a walk, or a brief moment to talk about our dreams for the future. There were times, though, when the weight of everything would feel overwhelming. The intimacy we once shared seemed like a distant memory, buried beneath the layers of daily life. It wasn't that we loved each other less, but the demands of being parents had a way of stealing time and energy, rediscovering each other. One evening, after a particularly tough week, I noticed Mia was quieter than usual. We had both been feeling the strain, but neither of us had really talked about it. After putting our son to bed, I pulled her aside in the living room, the soft glow of the lamp casting gentle shadows on the walls. "Mia," I began, my voice tentative, "I feel like we've been so caught up in everything that's happening. Work, the house, our son, that we've been missing each other. I miss us." She looked at me, a soft smile playing at the corners of her lips. "I miss us too," she replied. "It's been hard to find time for just the two of us." I reached out and took her hand, feeling the warmth of her touch grounding me. "We need to make time, not just for our son, but for ourselves. We've come so far, and I don't want to lose what we've built." Mia squeezed my hand. "You're right. We'll figure it out. Maybe we can start with a date night, finding balance." And so we did. We made a pact to put the stress of daily life on pause every once in a while, carving out moments for just the two of us. A simple dinner out, a walk through the park, or a quiet night in, where we'd talk about everything and nothing. It wasn't about grand gestures, but rather about the small, consistent acts of care and attention that kept our connection strong. As our son grew older, the demands of parenting evolved, and so did our relationship. We found ourselves in a new rhythm, one that allowed us to be both partners and parents. We learned to communicate better, to give each other grace during difficult moments, and to celebrate the joys of parenthood together. But there were still moments of tension. Parenting was never easy, and we didn't always agree on everything. But each disagreement became an opportunity to grow, to listen more carefully, and to respect the differences in our approaches. We learned that love wasn't just about agreeing on everything, but about supporting each other through the challenges. The role of vulnerability. One evening, during a quiet dinner after our son had gone to bed, Mia and I found ourselves talking about the future, about our dreams, the things we still wanted to accomplish together. "I've been thinking a lot lately," Mia said, her voice soft. "I want to make sure we don't lose ourselves in this life we've built. I want us to still be us, not just parents, but partners. We can't forget how we got here." I nodded, feeling a deep sense of gratitude for her words. "I've been thinking about that too," I admitted, "about how easy it is to get caught up in the day-to-day. But we need to remember that we're a team. We're in this together." It was in that moment, as we shared our thoughts and fears, that I realized how essential vulnerability was in our relationship. We didn't have to be perfect, and we didn't have to have everything figured out. What mattered was that we were open with each other, about our hopes, our struggles, and the things that scared us. A new chapter. Embracing the unexpected. A few years later, we found ourselves contemplating yet another major shift. Our family was growing. Mia and I had talked about having another child, but the timing was never right. Until it was. When we found out we were expecting again, the excitement was palpable, but so were the fears. Would we be able to handle 2 children? Could we maintain the balance we had worked so hard to find? These were the questions that kept us up at night, but as always, we faced them together. The pregnancy was more challenging this time, and there were moments when we both felt overwhelmed by the demands of raising 2 young children. How'd we maintain the balance we had worked so hard to find? These were the questions that kept us up at night, but as always, we faced them together. The pregnancy was more challenging this time, and there were moments when we both felt overwhelmed by the demands of raising 2 young children. But it was also a time of immense joy. Watching our son become a big brother, seeing the way he cared for his new sibling before they were even born, filled our hearts with pride and love. When our daughter was born, it felt like the world had shifted again. Our family was complete, and in that moment, I realized just how much we had evolved. From the pain of the past to the beauty of the present, we had created something that was ours, something built on love, trust, and resilience. The power of partnership. As we navigated the challenges of life with 2 young children, Mia and I continued to support each other, to love each other, and to grow together. We learned that the foundation we had built in the early years of our relationship, based on communication, mutual respect, and vulnerability, was the same foundation that kept us strong through every trial. Parenthood wasn't always easy. There were still moments of doubt, frustration, and exhaustion. But every challenge we faced made our bond stronger. We were partners in every sense of the word, and together we could weather whatever life threw our way. As we sat together one evening, watching our children play in the yard, I realized that the life we had built wasn't just about surviving, it was about thriving. We had created a love that was rooted in the deepest parts of our hearts, and it was a love that would continue to grow. In the end, the journey we had taken, from betrayal to redemption, from pain to joy, had led us to this point. And as long as we were together, I knew we could face whatever came next.